This is Duke University.
Before delving a little bit further into what we do in Latin America and the Caribbean, I think it's important to recognize something about ELAC that makes it unique from some of the other working groups. We are composed of students not just in the master's program at the Nicholas School, which is where I'm from, but also undergraduates, graduates from other programs, PhD candidates, and professors from both Duke and UNC Chapel Hill. Because we have such a broad array of perspectives, we're able to have more robust conversation when we get together and talk about issues regarding electricity in this region, which is something that I really appreciate about ELAC that I don't think I would have come across anywhere else. So this is our first year with ELAC, and so we're kind of still putting it all together. But we looked at Latin America and the Caribbean and thought, this is an enormous region, and there needs to be some way, right, for us to break it down. We can't just approach it all at once. The way that we eventually decided to do that was by focusing on particular countries. As you can see on this list behind me, these are the countries that we decided to focus on this year. However, they're not the only countries that we're hoping to research as in coming years as ELAC. We chose Brazil, Paraguay, Mexico, Colombia, and Cuba initially. And we chose those countries because we already have contacts there. Either we know professors or we know business professionals or we're working on projects in those regions that made them a little bit more accessible to us as we were kind of working through the logistics of starting a new working group. Now you see up there that we added Puerto Rico to the end of that list. Originally, Puerto Rico was not one of the countries on which we were hoping to focus this year. However, we were fortunate enough to hear from Professor Robert Healy, one of the professors here at Duke University, that he had contacts who were working on some of the reconstruction efforts regarding electricity following the recent hurricanes in that region. What we do is we get together, as many of us as possible, and sit and have a conversation about what's happening in the electricity and energy sector in the particular country. In preparation for those meetings, we do a fair bit of research. We look at policy briefs, and we look at scholastic journals, and we look at videos to kind of inform ourselves about what's happening in the country before we get together. What we do is we bring a professional or an academic from the country that we're studying up to Duke University to have a conversation with us. Because we already had 2 meetings talking about kind of the minutia around the electricity sector in their country, we can bounce ideas off of them and listen to kind of their opinions that we wouldn't have access to otherwise. We've been lucky enough to already go through with one set of those 3 meetings, as I mentioned before. Professor Ilo Sauer visited from the University of Sao Paulo a few weeks ago.
We have sort of a core group of members who show up to every meeting, and we've watched each other's research grow and develop over time. And most of our meetings are led by one or a group of people. Oops, that's not the right one. So we have an interdisciplinary group. It's mostly it's all PhD students right now across the different social sciences departments. And we sort of came together because we shared a common challenge. And that challenge is there are a decent number of classes on international development in our respective departments, but there aren't as many offerings to focus on differential outcomes for these different groups. And development is more than just macro level growth. And so for some of the students in the econ department, some students in political science, some students in sociology and psychology, we want sort of a more focus on these differential outcomes for different groups. So most meetings so far have been a student bringing in a research problem that they have. They might present research at a variety of stages, from things they're about to present for their preliminary exams to maybe just an inkling of an interesting problem. And our diverse group members give them feedback from across disciplines. Lastly, we have skill shares and training sessions where we have either an external expert come in and talk to us, or we share what we know amongst ourselves. So I think that our meetings are really what is the bread and butter of what Informed Choices for Equitable Development is up to. Here are some examples from last year. We have students working on Indian slums, students working on indoor and outdoor air pollution in Indonesia. I have a project on role models in higher education in India.
We established recently, a couple of years ago, within the Division of Neurosurgery, a division that's dedicated solely to doing research in neurosurgery, specifically in East Africa. So we developed the Duke Global Neurosurgery and Neurology, and so our work is specifically trying to figure out how do we expand access and providing better supply to physicians, as well as just improving the overall health system in these countries that have a large deficit for the number of neurosurgeons. So here at Duke and a lot of places around the Triangle, basically we throw away a lot of equipment that is perfectly normal and can be used. And so we actually take that equipment and we bring that over to countries in East Africa, and we use that equipment there. We do the research side of things, as well as we have this top-down approach. We're we're not in any kind of illusion that neurosurgery is the like pinnacle of health, especially because there's lots of other issues that are happening in these countries. But if you're able to improve the way that neurosurgery is performed in the hospital, the sort of externalities of the work that you're doing allows it to spread to other surgeries that are happening. And if we can have someone do safe neurosurgery, then they certainly are then able to do safe abdominal surgery and other things that are more consistent there. And so that's our concept. With all of this, you need to build infrastructure, as well as then you need to change policy on the sort of greater level. And so our working group specifically focused on a smaller piece of this sort of overall project, which is looking specifically at the in-hospital outcomes. So we have our working group is split into smaller little pieces, where we have one group that's looking at infection control in the hospital setting, one group that's looking at medication management, and then another group that's looking at patient caretaker education. And so what we do is we talk about these topics. We look at the research that our like broader group has already done. We bring that to the working group, and then we come up with, so what's that next step of that research? What haven't we thought of? We look at the broader research that our overarching DGNN group does. We look at how do we then approach it in a different angle. We bring recommendations to the larger group, and then someone else takes that research on and implements it within the countries that we're working with.
So the working group in Slavery, Gender, and War was the brainchild of Thavolia Glimpf, who is a professor of history in African and African American studies, and her PhD advisee, Alicia Hines. So the four of us consider ourselves the founding members of the group, and we decided that the purpose of the working group would be twofold. First of all, we want to bring scholars in the field of women and gender, the Civil War, and slavery to Duke to talk about their work. And second of all, we want to provide graduate students with opportunities to discuss their own writing and interests with more senior scholars. And the workshops we host are spaces for brainstorming, discussion, collaboration, with an emphasis on thinking through the process of scholarly writing and publishing. So we've held 3 workshops so far, each of which received generous funding from the Departments of History and AAAS, the Center for International and Global Studies, and the most recent of which we received support from the program in Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies. First of all, we really want the group to be of interdisciplinary interest. So even though all of the founding members of the group are based out of the Department of History, we've had students and faculty from the Departments of English, AAAS, which is African and African American Studies, and literature at our workshops, and we'd like to continue that trend. Second of all, as I mentioned, we're really making an effort to collaborate with scholars at different institutions in the area, in particular NC State, NCCU, and UNC Chapel Hill.
So, Tony, you mentioned that the reason why you all focused on East Africa, but why Uganda versus, say, Kenya or Tanzania? And then, secondly, the evidence that you presented was compelling in terms of the results you're getting. What are you all doing to actually disseminate the lessons learned throughout East Africa, as opposed to just looking at it in an isolated context?
Yeah, so to the first part of your comment, so the reason why we work in Uganda the most is just because we've been there since 2007 doing work there. We do work specifically in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda. We have the most research efforts in Uganda. Just like any group, you have a specialty. And so right now, Uganda is our specialty. We're trying to do exactly what you're talking about. It's really hard to spread yourself too thin in this environment. And so we have, with the limited bandwidth, we're trying to make sure that we improve all the aspects of what we see as like our package for improving neurosurgical and neurology access and care within a single country, so that we can use some of those same lessons and apply it to somewhere else. It's really hard to do the same thing in Rwanda, which has a totally different environment, without fully understanding how have you done your best job in a country that you've been working in for a long time.
Excuse me, this is a question for Jacqueline or Jacqueline?
Either one.
Okay.
Fine.
So I was wondering if the group is looking at any more contemporary issues in the context of slavery, war, and gender. I'm thinking, for example, of women in conflict zones that are forced into sex work and are functionally slaves. You've referenced primarily. It seems like most of the work has been focusing on either pre or post Civil War era in the States, or maybe in your case in the Caribbean. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it's something we have been thinking about. So, all four of us, the founding members plus the Volja Glymph, we all work on Atlantic slavery. We're thinking about broadening our focus. But at the same time, I do think there is sort of, in some ways, maybe there is a certain political importance in maintaining a space really dedicated to the study of Black women's history.
Thank you all for being here. This is a really lame question, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about your leadership structure within your groups.
The majority of the logistic work is done by myself and a PhD student named Edgar Virgas, and so effectively what that entails is putting together the Facebook pages and running the email listserv and organizing meetings and working on logistics for bringing people to Duke University. Outside of that, we're hoping to kind of expand a little bit more into members of our working group and as we become a little bit more solid with who shows up. So I guess to answer your question, right now the bulk of the logistical work is just for the two of us, but it's something that we care about, right? And so it's something that we're okay putting the time in. And it's something that we hope maybe in the future we'll be able to distribute a little bit more as well.
We have a very dedicated core group of people. I got pulled into leadership because I showed up haphazardly as a first year, and I had a lot of good mentorship experiences with people in the group, and they sort of pulled me aside at our end of year luncheon, or oh, we think you'd be a great leader, and therefore these people are now third, fourth years. Some of them are doing field work, but they were able to sort of basically lead me through a first year and then have me be leader. I think that is one of the benefits of having a dedicated group.
I think we have the same advantage. So all the students from our group are coming from the larger DGN, which has an overall structure already. And since I'm in a leadership position in that, it is transferred over to being the leader for this working group. We're identifying the medical students to help to lead the group, as well as a master's student that's a first year that will be able to be a leader the second year.
Yeah, so far my group hasn't experienced many problems in terms of dividing tasks amongst ourselves, sharing responsibilities. I think it helps that there are only four of us core members and we're all friends. So, if someone is overworked, the other three core members will pick up the slack.